Welcome to Let's Eat. I'm your host, Emily, holistic health coach and self-proclaimed wellness enthusiast, here to meet you at the intersection of physical and mental health, the exact location where optimal wellness lies. This podcast is meant to explore all areas of mind and body wellness, designed to offer you the integrative knowledge, behavioral strategies, and mindset shifts necessary to uplevel your health and feel better today. We'll explore nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care and stress management, habits and routines, gut health, mental health, and more. I am so happy that you're here. Welcome to the table. Let's eat. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Eat. We are in the month of May, and we are celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month. Last year, I created a free wellness guide, I guess you could call it, or series, is another word for it, where I focused every single day on one small way that you can improve your mental health, a lot of them having to do with physical health, so acknowledging that overlap. But I created this guide, and now it lives on my website. For anyone who might be interested in that download, it is 31 pages because there are 31 days in May, and every single day I highlighted a different tip or strategy or suggestion and explanation around that tip and strategy on how it benefits your mental health or benefits your brain. Very easy, very digestible, very accessible suggestions. And I hit every single day, and I was very proud of myself for that. That's, takes a lot of planning and consistency. But that is a free guide that lives on my website. If you're interested in downloading that, I can't believe it's been a whole year already. But every podcast through the month of May, we are talking about something related to mental health, because you all know I have a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. I worked as a therapist in a private practice for 1.5 years. I worked as an intern for over a year. So I have, a special place in my heart for mental health. While I'm not working as a therapist anymore, I still work with mental health in a way as a coach, because I do believe that a lot of our physical health behaviors, a lot of our physiology impacts our mental health. I think it contributes to the epidemic that we have going on in our country around mental health, and you're going to learn a little bit more about that today. Now, I want to preface all of this by saying that my expansion on 9 underlying causes of anxiety that you may not have thought of, right? If you are someone who experiences anxiety and so forth, is not by any means, an attempt to diminish how difficult anxiety can be, right? I myself struggle with anxiety. I found that it has gotten worse over the course of my 20s. I think about in high school or my early 20s. And while I definitely have had anxiety in different ways, I had a lot of separation anxiety as a kid from my mom. I remember that. Being away from home was really hard for me. But I don't remember it being the way it is now. And so I want to preface number one by saying I'm here with you. I feel you. I'm with you. And also, just because maybe some of these causes are physiological in nature, right, which you'll learn, that's not to say that they are any less challenging than someone who might have what we would call true anxiety, which I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. So I want to be sure I emphasize that, because at no point am I trying to diminish or make you feel as though the anxiety that you're experiencing shouldn't be as challenging as it is, because I know how challenging it can be. But I really want to illuminate that there are so many causes, underlying influences to how we feel, and not only with anxiety, but with depression as well, which I'll share a little bit more as I move through this episode on that. But today's purpose is really to focus on anxiety, that we can actually take a lot of action in and actually make a huge difference in how we feel if we were to look at these factors, these contributing, influences in our own personal lives. And that's really what I want you to take away from this episode. Is I want you to feel empowered. I want you to feel like, wow, okay, I never thought of it that way. And that is likely relevant to me and my circumstances, or that resonates with me, let me give this a go. Because alongside these contributing factors or underlying causes, I'm also going to give you some strategies on how to address it. Because I want you to always have something tangible to take away from the episode so that you feel like you're gaining something, you're learning something. And maybe this is something that you feel would help someone else. Maybe this is something that, you can share with a friend or a family member that is navigating something that is really hard for them. And it might open their eyes a little bit more to other ways of looking at their anxiety, and hopefully giving them some relief as well. It's so funny too, just as an aside, I can't wait till I'm able to record myself doing this. Now, full disclosure, like more often than not, I'm recording these episodes on my couch in my jammies, okay? Like no makeup on. When the inspiration strikes, I just plug in my mic and I call it a day. But I talk with my hands so much. I am such a hand talker. That is a thing. I am Italian. I've heard that that's part of the reason why. But I move my hands so much when I'm talking, and I feel like that is, I just can't not do that. And so when we're on YouTube, you're going to be seeing that. Not only will I hopefully prepare myself a little bit better so I don't look this way, but you'll also be able to appreciate the fact that I just emphasize a lot with my hands. I use my hands all the time when I'm talking. So right now the mic is balancing on my torso and I'm talking with my hands. So, it's at risk of falling over, and, I'm doing this to myself. My computer is propped up on a pillow. I'm just giving you the real deal here. Okay. So let's dive in to 9 underlying causes of your anxiety. So I want to start by giving a definition of what we call false anxiety. Now, I learned about this concept from Dr. Ellen Vora. She is a holistic psychiatrist. She wrote the book, The Anatomy of Anxiety. Love this book. It is quite literally a manual for someone who experiences anxiety. I'm telling you, it is jam-packed with so much value. I even brought it to my book club with my private practice when I was working as a therapist. Every month someone chose a book, and that was the book that I chose because I read it through and I was like, this is so valuable for therapists to read, for those who struggle with anxiety to read. I mean, I'm telling you, it is such a wonderful book. So Dr. Ellen Vora, The Anatomy of Anxiety, I will put the information in the show notes for you to reference it. I don't think that this is her original concept, though. I will say that. I can't speak to that entirely. She does talk about it in the book quite a bit, but I don't know if it's her original concept. But she talks about false anxiety. And like I said before, this does not diminish the discomfort that this type of anxiety can bring. However, it really shows you the discrepancy between anxiety that's caused by physiological imbalances or lifestyle-related factors versus true anxiety, which is more deeply rooted. Okay, so what it really boils down to is our brains are always trying to keep us safe, and they're always trying to make meaning of our environment. That is a innate part of our bodies, of our brains, of our chemistry, is that we're always trying to keep ourselves safe. And this goes back to centuries prior, right, where there were actual threats to our existence, to our survival in our environment all the time. Nowadays, it's not necessarily the same, right? We live in houses. We are relatively safe. I mean, in today's world, one could argue otherwise, but in our, most basic parts of our beings, this is a part of us that has been hardwired for years. And so any type of disarray or any type of imbalance or dysfunction, our body's going to try to understand, right? Our body's trying to make meaning of it in order for us to be safe, in order for us to know what to do next, right? In order for us to be safe, in order for us to to survive, we have to understand, okay, well, what is the solution to this dysfunction, right? Why is this dysfunction happening? What's happening here, and so forth, okay? So this is an important piece to this puzzle, because if I am feeling out of balance for whatever reason, my brain is going to come up with scenarios to match the dysfunction, match the imbalance to a reason why. And that might be something in our physical environment, something to do with our boss or our girlfriend or whatever it is, right? We're always trying to understand why we're feeling a certain way, why we might feel kind of off, why we might be feeling super anxious, right? And that's really where, we can start to perpetuate the anxiety that we're feeling, right? Because if our brain generates, well, oh, my boss must be mad at me because I said this the other day, or I didn't turn this in on time, and now I'm feeling super stressed about it, and so forth, right? And that kind of spirals and becomes a snowball effect, and then, it creates emotion, and then we likely then behave as a result of that emotion, right? Because if we have a thought about what's going on, this is basic cognitive behavioral therapy, that's going to generate emotion, and in this case, it's generating more anxiety or stress or fear or whatever it might be, and then that's going to cause us to behave in a certain way, and then we see this kind of cycle continues. Okay, so when it comes to false anxiety, the difference between false anxiety and true anxiety is the fact that false anxiety is generated from something like a physiological imbalance, so sleep deprivation, being hungover, being hungry or hangry, right? Having some sort of hormonal imbalance, okay? All of these issues are considered false anxiety because the symptoms of them resemble what you might see as the criteria for generalized anxiety disorder and so forth, but it's actually being caused by something imbalanced within the body and not anxiety itself, okay? And then we see issues like true anxiety, where this is a formal diagnosis. This could be due to trauma of some kind and so forth. And the difference there is significant, right? The difference there is significant because if you think about it, if I am experiencing anxiety and I'm giving a medication that's meant to address the anxiety, but it's actually just an imbalance in my blood sugar, how effective do we really think this medication is going to be? If I'm experiencing irritability, if I'm experiencing feeling keyed up or worried or on edge, which are all symptoms, diagnostic symptoms of anxiety, but it's actually an underlying blood sugar imbalance, and I'm being medicated as though it's anxiety because I've gone to the doctors or I've gone to see a psychiatrist and they've said, yes, it sounds like you have anxiety, right? But you're not addressing your dietary choices and so forth. How effective do we really think that this medication is going to be? Maybe in some capacity it will be effective. I'm not trying to say it's a black and white answer there, but if we're not getting to the root issue of a blood sugar imbalance, which likely then contributes to cortisol issues, which then contributes to sleep issues, which then contributes to other hormonal imbalances, right? Like we know how everything's connected. We're going to still be experiencing this anxiety, this level of uneasiness, and really not feel better because of that, okay? So I hope that gives you a clear picture. Now, that's just one example of this false anxiety concept, but I wanted to give you a tangible example of what I mean by false anxiety, because it's not to say that it doesn't still feel uncomfortable, right? It's not to say that it doesn't still, bring us difficulty and impacts our ability to function from a day-to-day basis, but it also stems from something else other than what would be considered true anxiety. And I think that delineation here is super, super important. And this is where we're going to get into 9 different causes of underlying anxiety, right, that we can easily mitigate through making different nutritional or lifestyle choices that we might not otherwise know of. So in order to really articulate this a little better, I thought I would bring out the book and read you an excerpt from it, and then we'll dive in. Okay, so once again, this is from the book The Anatomy of Anxiety by Dr. Ellen Vora. And she states, This is not a diagnosis, but rather an interpretation that I found has helped my patients target the source of their unease and more swiftly identify the steps that need to be taken toward greater comfort and happiness. Julia Ross, a pioneer in nutritional therapy, first opened my eyes to this concept in her book, The Mood Cure. And side note, I immediately went and bought that book after I read this, this section. Ross proposes that we have true emotions and false moods. True emotion occurs when something steeply challenging has happened. A family member passes away and you're grieving, you lose your job and you're stressed, you're going through a breakup and you're sad. These genuine responses to the real difficulties we encounter in life can be hard to take, writes Ross, but they can also be vitally important. A false mood, on the other hand, is more like an emotional imposter, as Ross puts it. When we seem to just wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or seemingly out of nowhere find ourselves feeling irritable, sad, angry, or anxious about things that wouldn't normally trip us up. At these times, our minds are all too happy to swoop in with an explanation. Our brain says, maybe I'm anxious because my boss's aloof email seems to suggest I'm underperforming at work, or something about that text from an old friend is not sitting right with me. Our minds are meaning makers, as I alluded to earlier. Give us a picture of two dots in a line and our minds see a face. Give us a hangover and a cold brew in lieu of breakfast and we think we're in trouble at work, our relationship is falling apart, or the world is doomed. Because our minds like to tell us stories that explain our physical sensations. And much of our worry is just this: our minds trying to justify a stress response in the physical body. Ross's paradigm can also be applied exclusively to anxiety. False anxiety is the body communicating that there is a physiological imbalance, usually through a stress response, whereas true anxiety is the body communicating an essential message about our lives. In false anxiety, the stress response transmits signals up to our brain telling us something is not right, and our brain, in turn, offers a narrative for why we feel uneasy. It tells us we're anxious because of our work or our health or the state of the world. But the truth is there's always something to feel uneasy about. And the reason we're struck with anxiety in this moment actually has nothing to do with the office and everything to do with a state of physiological imbalance in the body. Something as simple as a blood sugar crash or a bout of gut inflammation. Much of our anxiety in this sense is unrelated to what we think it's about. Now, I am obsessed with that passage. I'm obsessed with it. Okay. And she continues on to say that, false anxiety, like I mentioned before, it doesn't mean that the pain or the suffering's any less real, right? It can still be really, really challenging. But oftentimes we misinterpret what is going on because of this physical issue that our brain is trying to make meaning of. And there's a lot of physiological issues that could be driving the anxiety as well. Okay, so let's dive into those 9 underlying causes. So first and foremost is nutritional deficiencies, okay? If you haven't yet listened to my episode on nutritional deficiencies, I encourage you to go back and listen. I dive into the 5 reasons why we as Americans are so deficient. But what's unfortunate is I'll simply give you, a summary of that episode is, we're just not eating enough of the good stuff, right? We're not eating enough of the foods that are nutritionally abundant. And the standard American diet is nutritionally devoid. And also the food that we're eating is just less nutritious. So even if we are eating all of the most healthful options, real whole foods, they're simply not as nutritious as they once were. And so this is a really important consideration because this is obviously a big driving force as to why we are so deficient. For example, nearly 70% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. And magnesium is an anti-anxiety. It is an anxiolytic, as they call it. It's the anti-stress mineral. And not only does magnesium play a massive role in hundreds and hundreds of processes within the body, especially when it comes to anxiety, deficiencies can be a driving force of that. Okay. So keeping this in mind when we are imbalanced in terms of, our nutrition, it plays a massive role in how we feel and how our body functions. And if our body's incapable of maintaining that homeostasis because there's dysfunction or because there's deficiency, then of course we're going to feel uneasy. Of course, we're going to feel symptomatic in some way. Now, it's not always to say that it's going to manifest as anxiety, right? But this is just one of those driving forces that can cause what feels like anxiety. Okay, so first and foremost, nutritional deficiencies. My suggestions here would be to prioritize eating real whole foods as often as you can. Stay away from ultra processed foods, right? Obviously, those are drivers of inflammation. So not only do they not have the nutrition that we need, but they also inhibit our body's ability to utilize the nutrition that we are eating, right? It compromises absorption because if our gut is unwell because of inflammation, it's all connected. Okay, so minimize how much of the standard American diet that you're eating, the ultra processed foods. Increase the amount of real whole foods that you're eating. And then if supplementation is something that you are interested in, I would encourage you to work with someone who's qualified to support you in that. But even going as far as the testing in order to look at what are your minerals levels look like, look at your vitamin D, look at your fatty acids, right? Look at these, key components, especially when it relates to nutrition like omega-3s and vitamin D and magnesium that are, linked to poor mental health, right? That are linked to our brain and neuroinflammation and so forth. It can really, really benefit us outside of already just whole body health, but especially from a mental and emotional health perspective. Secondly, our relationship with technology. Okay, we all can agree that the influx in technology, especially in a post-pandemic world, is very evident. There's no denying that, right? And so there's two different pieces to this puzzle here. Our relationship with technology in the sense of the use of social media, doom scrolling, spending too much time on TikTok or on, Facebook or whatever the case is, right? We know that not only does that diminish what we're doing in real life, right? In terms of social connection, in terms of connecting with people face to face, which research is continuing to emerge about the impact of that. But it's also, a very harmful space for comparison and, highlight reels. And we see this in younger populations, especially because now more than ever, younger populations are being exposed to it earlier on. And for me, luckily, social media really did not start, I would say maybe until I was like a sophomore or junior in high school. I think I got Instagram in high school. Maybe Snapchat was around. I don't really remember. Facebook was something I had in 8th grade. I know that. Or maybe it was, 8th grade, which is totally wild when you really think about the fact that I'm now 29 and I've had my Facebook since I was 14. So I have 15 years of memories and pictures and things to look back on. It's kind of like my own scrapbook to some extent, right? Like looking at all these memories, and also cringing at all the old Facebook statuses that I used to write. Yes, that was me, but we'll just let that one go. You're seeing obviously an influx in social media use at younger ages, and we see how this is impacting young, generations and their mental health. And I don't think it's exclusive to younger populations, right? I think we see this as adults. I mean, I know I feel it for sure. I feel it more specifically as a business owner, which I think is an interesting take on this. The comparison game in that regard, or the comparison trap rather, is definitely very real as a business owner, as a health coach, especially now as we're seeing, especially something like TikTok become so saturated with health and wellness coaches. It can be really hard to not compare or not feel like the industry is too saturated or to feel discouraged by how much is out there, right? So there's a few components here, right? It's your relationship with technology in the sense of social media use. It is also the overconsumption or overexposure to blue light. I think that is a piece that we don't consider. We're exposed to blue light incessantly. And what happens here is our bodies and our brains and our eyes receive this light. And I'll get a little sciencey here. So the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is in the hypothalamus, which is in the brain, takes in the light and signals to the pineal gland that, okay, it's daytime. We should be awake. We should be alert. And that, as a result, releases cortisol. Okay, we know cortisol is our main stress hormone. And because of this light exposure, our sleep-wake cycle, which we know is responsible for releasing cortisol at its designated time and releasing melatonin at its designated time, is now dysregulated because our body's confused what is going on. It's like trying to sleep in Times Square. You're not going to be able to sleep in Times Square because the lights, it's as though it's daytime in Times Square all the time, right? Because it's so bright. So when you think about it, if our body is signaled by blue light and even overhead light and so forth that it's daytime and it's releasing cortisol, then our melatonin production is suppressed. And then from there, we're going to have more trouble getting to sleep, okay? But if we have an imbalance in our cortisol, that is really obviously impactful upon how we feel, right? The level of stress that we're experiencing. And then simultaneously, it's impacting our quality of sleep, which then can promote sleep deprivation. And then we know that with sleep deprivation, which we'll talk about as an example later on, also drives up anxiety. Okay, I think one night of sleep deprivation increases anxiety by 30% or something. I'll have to fact check that. But that is crazy to think about, right? Just being sleep deprived, which I know is very relevant. Now I'm getting ahead of myself, but very relevant to me. When I don't sleep, I am such a sleeper. 9 to 10 hours, please give me more. I love to sleep. And when I don't sleep, I notice it so much in my levels of anxiety. That is something that is so evident to me. So I am a firsthand, living testament to this, but I won't get ahead of myself. We'll talk about sleep deprivation in a minute. So while technology is wonderful in so many ways, and a lot of us rely on it for the sake of work or socializing or whatever the case is, really being aware of your relationship with it because of its addictive nature and because of what it does to our mental health is something that I'm always trying to encourage clients with. Now, I think the best suggestion I can give you in terms of, starting somewhere is starting to tack off a half hour in the morning and a half hour at night so that your use of blue light and technology and social media becomes lesser and lesser first thing in the morning and the last thing that you do before bed. And I think that those are the areas that we see it most common. We wake up, we reach for our phones. We lay in bed before bed and we scroll, right? And this is where it's actually pivotal to our sleep-wake cycle that we are delaying that and avoiding that. So in the mornings, I would try and give yourself as much time as you can. This is something that I am actively working on. So I don't want to come across as though I'm mastered this, okay? Try and delay your use of technology and screens and so forth as best as you can, and try to get natural light if you can beforehand. Natural light before blue light always. And then at night, start to dim your overhead lighting, start to dim what you can, turn off lights, and reduce your exposure to these screens so that you're able to healthfully release the melatonin that's needed to help you get to sleep, right? None of this laying in bed and scrolling, none of that. There are some features on iPhones, and I'm sure they exist on Androids, but I'm not totally sure, that allow you to turn on what's called night shift mode, and that gives your phone an amber hue. You can also use blue light glasses. I would be sure to do your research in finding ones that are actually legitimate, because I think that some are better than others. But those are my few suggestions. And then also just consider, do I need to set boundaries with social media? Is this impacting my mental health more than it should be? Or should I set stronger boundaries around it and so forth? So your relationship with technology, it's multifaceted in a lot of ways, but I would encourage you in this day and age, in a post-pandemic world, take a look at your habits as it relates to technology and your relationship with social media and so forth, and go from there. Okay, so number 3, and this one is pretty broad because of the factors that kind of make up this concept or this factor. And so everyone's going to be very specific. I want to preface this by saying that. But this is a big one. Hormonal issues and imbalances. Okay, when it comes to our hormones, they act like a symphony. All right, I want you to think of your hormones as a symphony, and this includes your sex hormones, this includes your stress hormones, this includes your thyroid hormones, this includes all of it. And what we know about a symphony is they all need to operate in a harmonious way, right? If you're listening to a symphony and the flute is going off on its own I don't know why I thought about a flute. I played the flute for a little while when I was in middle school. Maybe that's why it came to mind. Well, let's think about it, right? If a symphony is all in harmony and everyone's playing their designated roles and their parts, but then you hear the flute and it's, playing something completely different, then obviously you're going to be like, what is going on here, right? And it'll be obvious too. All of these musical instruments meant to play their designated role, and then one instrument is in its own world, right? Then obviously you're going to notice that and be aware of that, and it's going to be very obvious, okay? So I want you to think about this analogy as it relates to hormones. It's so important that we are cognizant of hormone health outside of just what we think of in terms of estrogen and testosterone, right? There's so many other intricate key players in this, and understanding that when our hormones are out of whack, that can generate symptoms of all capacities, right? It's not just this anxiety, this false anxiety, but it's also evident in so many other relevant symptoms that we've normalized, right? Things like PMS. We've really normalized PMS. And, having imbalances in our thyroid health, right? That is huge. That is so commonplace. Hypothyroidism is so underdiagnosed, but so prevalent. And what's also important to consider here is our hormones are so sensitive to external impact, right? So our thyroid hormones are so sensitive to endocrine disruptors. So the fragrances we're using and environmental toxins and so forth. Our cortisol, that is a stress hormone, right? And that, I think, is one of the biggest hormonal imbalances that exist because we're so chronically stressed, okay? Insulin is produced by the pancreas. And when we have a blood sugar issue, that is also super commonplace. I mean, 84% of Americans are pre-diabetic and don't know it. It is so widespread. It's driving chronic illness, and it's also causing a lot of dysfunction, inflammation, and anxiety. Okay, so hormonal issues and imbalances, like I said, that could be a whole topic in and of itself. I think I highlighted a few of the more prominent ones that we see, but really understanding this and getting your levels checked and understanding what your lifestyle looks like in relation to your hormones, that is massive. Huge, huge, huge. Okay, your thyroid, your insulin levels, what's going on with your blood sugar? Are you stabilizing your blood sugar? What's going on with your sex hormones? What's going on with your cortisol? I mean, I could go on and on and on. So addressing these issues is imperative in order to rebalance, to restore homeostasis within your body. I mean, all the time we're hearing how to balance your hormones, how to rebalance your hormones, right? And it's like this trendy, focus now, which I'm grateful that awareness is being built around it, but everyone's so different, right? And you have to really understand this concept so much more deeply in order to really adequately address these issues. So 110%, look at your hormone health, take care of your hormone health, practice good hormone hygiene, all right? And I would suggest, really understanding your body specifically when looking at any kind of hormonal issue or imbalance. Okay, the next piece of this puzzle is hunger. Okay? Feeling hungry, depriving yourself of food leads to a variety of different issues, okay? You can generate a stress response as a result of that. You can cause low blood sugar, right? Which then results in irritability and lethargy and so forth. So really being aware of stabilizing your blood sugar, which I just mentioned, but also eating when you're hungry. None of this starvation or restrictive living, right? You know how I feel about that. Not going long periods of time without food, planning accordingly if you know you're going to be out and about, keeping snacks readily available, preferably high protein. All right, keep this in mind. Something as simple as hunger can really make a difference in how you feel, right? We all have been hangry at one point or another. Lulu's having a bad dream. Oh, I just woke her up. I didn't know if you could hear her in the background. We've all been hangry, one time or another, all right? And that can definitely generate symptoms of anxiety, and we can really, feel unwell as a result of it. So keep this piece in mind, really important. Okay, next, hangovers. Now, this is 98% of the reason why I just do not drink anymore. Maybe not 98%, maybe 90%, okay? The other reasons are just because it disrupts my sleep and just don't care for it anymore. Okay. I'm actually planning on releasing an episode about my changing relationship with alcohol coming in a couple weeks. But I will say hangovers and hangover anxiety is a very real thing. And what is essentially happening here is your liver is working overtime to restore homeostasis within the body, right? You've just voluntarily consumed a toxin. Okay, we know alcohol is a toxin, and your body is working to metabolize it, primarily your liver. And your body is trying to get it out of your system because of the fact that it is a toxin. It is recognizing it as a toxin. And obviously, we know alcohol use can also contribute to issues like leaky gut, which I'll get into. That's the next topic we're going to cover. But really understanding what does my relationship with alcohol look like and how do I feel from day to day? Am I someone who is prone to anxiety? Is anxiety something that I navigate, frequently? That would honestly be the first place that I suggest you start. Now, like I said before, for me personally, hangovers used to just be like physical discomfort. I mean, when I was like 17, 18 years old, your girl had no hangover, right? Which I think we can all say in our younger years, we could get up and drink and we'd be fine and then do it again the next day, right? But as we get older, as we age, this becomes a little more challenging. And for me, yes, physical symptoms still very much present for me, even just after one glass of wine. But the impact that this has on my sleep, first and foremost, which you all know, like I said, I love my sleep. And so please do not mess with my sleep. I want to sleep soundly, restoratively. I want to feel good the next day after my sleep. I want to feel refreshed. And I take my sleep very seriously. So alcohol just has no place for me. Even one glass of wine will disrupt my sleep. So no good. I'm good. And secondly, it's the mental health impact that this had on me, right? I would wake up the next day and I had so much like gloom and doom and, like this existential crisis of like, these really intense feelings about life and I was not feeling right. Okay. So like this kind of mesh of anxiety and depression, right? Kind of together. I was just like not here for it. Not at all. Okay. Not one bit. And I would be tired. It was just not a good combination. And when your equilibrium is off in that regard, you're going to feel uneasy. Now, I think a lot of people refer to hangover anxiety or hangxiety as, what did I say last night? What did I do last night? Did I sound stupid? What happened? Right. And I think that while yes, that can be considered hangover anxiety, I really think that there's a physiological issue, right? It's not like I drank too much and now I don't remember what happened. So, oh my goodness, what do? It's more like a physiological response for me than it was anything else, right? It wasn't like, oh, I'm worried about what I said last night. It wasn't that. It was like a social anxiety. It was, I feel in my body uneasy and I don't feel good. I feel anxious. So with that said, like I said before, if you are someone who is frequently consuming alcohol, I would do a real serious, honest evaluation and audit of your relationship with alcohol in order to decide, does this serve me in my life right now if I'm feeling this way so commonly, so frequently? And then nextly, understanding that, disruption of your sleep is going to generate symptoms of anxiety because sleep deprivation can do that. I think I do cover this later on. And your body metabolizing alcohol doesn't leave time for it to metabolize the other toxins and hormones and, organic byproducts that exist in our bodies that our liver's responsible for metabolizing, on top of the personal care products that we're using and the medications we're taking and so forth. It places a lot of burden on our liver. And so that is one thing that we can voluntarily remove because no one's forcing us to drink alcohol, right? I personally too learned last summer that my detox pathways are compromised. So that's also kind of a reason why I stopped drinking, because I know that my body has a harder time metabolizing it, which I think is probably why I have such difficulty after I've consumed alcohol and how I feel, because my poor liver is struggling to handle it. But just generally speaking, imbalance is real after having alcohol. our body is working overtime to break down the alcohol, to metabolize it. I believe the liver is most active between 1 and 3 a.m. So that is when the bulk of this metabolism is taking place. And so sleep is very disrupted as a result of that, right? Because your liver is working while you're sleeping, in order to metabolize and break down this alcohol, but also your deep sleep is impacted and you're not able to get good quality sleep when alcohol is involved. So something to consider, something to think about, something to reflect on personally. I think this is one of the best ways to get started to really understand the impact that alcohol is having on you. Alcohol can also promote nutritional deficiencies, okay? So it's all interconnected. I wanted to be sure I mentioned that. Alcohol is a stress on the body, okay? So we have to look at it as so. I think we've really normalized, just culturally speaking, the social aspect to alcohol. And don't get me wrong, balance is important. There's a time and place. But if you are someone who's experiencing anxiety, I would suggest look here first and then go from there. Next, I really don't know how I waited this long. This one should have been the first one that I covered, okay? Leaky gut or gut issues. Now, this could be an episode all on its own, and I think it's going to be an episode because I have to talk about the gut-brain connection. But to give you the Spark Notes version here, so much of our gut is responsible for what's happening in our brain. Our gut and our brain have a bidirectional relationship, and digestive inflammation and gut issues are one of the most common issues that we see nowadays in our population, okay? When it comes to mental health, any kind of imbalance or leaky gut, which is essentially the permeability of our gut lining, can result in symptoms of anxiety. Okay, the gut's responsible for production of our serotonin. 95% of our serotonin is made in our gut, which is our happy chemical. Dopamine is created in the gut, okay? And any kind of issues like a bacterial overgrowth or dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in our gut, leaky gut, as I just mentioned, can create imbalance and issues and feelings of anxiety. Okay, there's a book called Gut Feelings by Dr. Will Cole. He's wonderful. Please read that book. It's a great book. And he goes into this more in depth. But it's interesting too because symptoms of anxiety are linked closely with digestive issues. And this has to do with the relationship between stress and anxiety and our nervous system. And our nervous system as it relates to our digestion. Our nervous system and our digestion go hand in hand. And it is so fascinating how many times people go to doctors' offices and say, I have IBS. I have, this digestive issue, that digestive issue. And doctors are putting them on anti-anxiety meds or antidepressants as a result of that. Because so much overlap exists between these irritable bowel, digestive related issues and anxiety that most of these digestive issues are actually just manifestations of anxiety. Okay, so really understanding that relationship, I think 60% of IBS diagnoses overlap with anxiety disorders, something of that nature. There's such a significant overlap between anxiety and poor digestion, and understanding how our gut relates to our nervous system, relates to our brain, relates to how we feel. All of this interconnectedness is so important and so valuable, and I really look forward to being able to expand on this more because of how important it is. But the moral of the story here is take care of your gut, prioritize good gut hygiene. I talk about this exhaustively on TikTok, on Instagram, on my newsletter, on the podcast, everywhere. I'm always talking about gut health in some form or fashion. And really understand that that could be a driving force as to why you're feeling so imbalanced or you're feeling anxious. Looking at your gut, understanding what's going on in your gut health so that you can better understand why you might be feeling a particular way. Next, let's talk about caffeine. All right, if you're drinking strong coffee all day long, now we know that that's problematic as it is. Caffeine has a half-life of 5 hours. So if you're having 100 milligrams of caffeine at 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock, that is going to take a long time for the body to work it out of the system. right? Because if it has a half-life of 5 hours, 100 milligrams, you're going to see, 50 milligrams 5 hours later. You're going to see 25 milligrams another 5 hours later. And by then it's already the morning, right? You've already, gotten up and probably had more caffeine, right? I know myself, I am a fast metabolizer of caffeine. There's a gene that's related to this. And when I had genetic testing done, I learned that. So caffeine doesn't have that much of an effect on me. But I know a lot of people who experience a lot of anxiety when they drink caffeine, or they have to have half calf or decaf because of its impact on the body. Okay. And having coffee without breakfast too, really, really important. Okay. When you're having coffee on an empty stomach, you are triggering an increase in cortisol. So naturally, our cortisol does peak between 9 and 11 in the morning. And that's what is, a natural part of our sleep-wake cycle. But if we're having coffee on an empty stomach, that triggers a heightened release of cortisol, which then can drive imbalances in that cycle and that process. So really promoting and prioritizing coffee with breakfast, coffee after breakfast. Dr. Andrew Huberman suggests having coffee 90 plus minutes after waking, which has to do with the buildup of adenosine in the brain, which is another chemical responsible for sleep and so forth. But really understanding what your relationship with caffeine and coffee and any caffeinated beverage at that, what that looks like for you specifically, because every single person is different. I personally switched over to matcha. I feel that matcha, while it does contain caffeine, it also has L-theanine in it, which helps to promote balance and calm. You see L-theanine in a lot of anti-anxiety herbal supplements or sleep supplements, just because of that calming effect that it brings. And it also balances out the caffeine. So the caffeine's still there, but it doesn't give you that kind of spike and crash like caffeine would on its own. So I'm a big fan of matcha. I drink it every day now. I'm going to put my preferred matcha in the show notes for you, because you can get 15% off and free shipping by using my link. I'm obsessed with Peak. They're the highest quality matcha. They're the very best. So I love coffee still. Coffee is still a part of my life. I don't go without coffee, but I'm more of a matcha drinker now, and I like herbal teas and so forth. So really being mindful of your relationship with caffeine, managing it, keeping it before noon if possible. That's always my recommendation, just to, avoid its influence that it could have on your sleep. That is going to be my suggestion for you in relation to caffeine and coffee and so forth on your levels of anxiety. Okay, sleep deprivation. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but sleep deprivation is considered 6.5 hours of sleep or less, all right? And when you are sleep deprived, your stress response is activated. And so this is an important piece of the puzzle, right? If you are not getting enough sleep, your physical health and your emotional wellness are compromised. And we live in a world that says that we can sleep when we're dead, right? We live in a world that says we don't need to sleep. We live in a world that says that sleep is unnecessary, or, I have to meet this deadline, or sleep consistency, sleep hygiene is not important, right? Like, we really don't prioritize sleep like we should. And it's very clear, obviously, in our physical health issues, in our mental health issues, okay? But sleep deprivation as a whole, as it relates to anxiety, can create and exacerbate the presence of anxiety, right? When we're not getting enough sleep, that's really stressful on the body, okay? Not only does it impact our stress levels, right? It also impacts our hunger hormones. It impacts so many factors that can also then drive up anxiety, right? So if we're feeling overly hungry and maybe we have less of the hormone that says that we're full, then maybe we're going to be eating more. We have stronger cravings, which leads us to eat more processed foods or maybe more sugar, which then can also impact our blood sugar and impact, these sugar highs and lows that are creating irritability. I mean, the list goes on. It's all connected, right? So getting enough sleep, prioritizing good quality sleep, not only is that good for emotional processing, it's good for brain health, right? Our brain needs that time to compartmentalize, to process, to, really address memory and all the things that are going on cognitively. It's also imperative to how we feel, right? All of those processes impact how we feel. So, you've heard the phrase sleep on it, right? And that's actually proven because there's, a lot of emotional processing that takes place when we sleep. And so if you're not sleeping, you don't have the opportunity to do that. It's also shown that we're less resilient towards stress, and stressors that maybe aren't otherwise as stressful trigger us more easily when we're not sleeping. We know that to be true. When you're cranky, you don't get enough sleep. Things that aren't necessarily as stressful are, pissing you off, right? So all of this is super, super important to consider. Get your sleep. Get your sleep for the sake of anxiety, but get your sleep for the sake of every single thing that is influenced by sleep, which is all areas of health. I am such a proponent for sleep. I am sleep's biggest fan, I'm pretty sure. Okay, get your sleep. Okay, and then lastly, I touched on this earlier, but this is a big piece of the puzzle: blood sugar imbalances and sugar crashes. This is huge. This is huge. We are so uneducated and so unequipped and misinformed about blood sugar and the importance of blood sugar stability and what that means and what that looks like on our plate. And unfortunately, I personally think this is probably one of the biggest drivers of this false anxiety and even maybe some depression as well. When we have a carb heavy breakfast, which is very standard American of us, right? Pancakes, waffles, cereals, and so forth. We have, a quick breakdown of those carbohydrates that spikes our blood glucose. Then we're seeing that crash. Then we're reaching for something to bring our blood sugar back up. And so then we're seeing that high again. And we see this blood sugar roller coaster that's taking place that's generating symptoms of irritability, of feeling keyed up, right? Being on that sugar high and then feeling that low, feeling that lethargy. And then it's this continuous process simply because we're so uneducated about what it means to have a stabilized blood sugar, what that requires, okay? So we're seeing lethargy and sluggishness and brain fog and fatigue and difficulty focusing and worry and restlessness, all very common symptoms of common mental health concerns, including anxiety. And it is an epidemic in and of itself because we're seeing these blood sugar issues contribute to prediabetes and insulin resistance. Then we're seeing it spiral into other chronic illnesses on top of diabetes. And it's really so problematic for our hormones, for our metabolic health, for every single thing that we do, all of the processes within the body, on our gut health, and really just about in the immediate term, right? How we focus, how we sleep, how we interact, right? Our energy, our mood, all of the factors are influenced by this, okay? So a few rapid fire suggestions on supporting your blood sugar. Protein. Get your protein, okay? Next to protein, we want to be sure we have fat and fiber. You don't want to eat your carbohydrates naked, all right? Always pair your carbs with some sort of protein, fat, fiber. Really prioritizing a balanced plate is essential, okay? Take a walk after your meals. That elongates the blood sugar curve. Taking apple cider vinegar before a meal has been shown to help support a healthy blood sugar. Building muscle mass, really important. Manage your stress. Another piece to the puzzle, okay? So that not only helps with anxiety, right, if we're managing our stress, but also what happens is when we have an excess of stress, we have cortisol that's released, and then cortisol mobilizes blood sugar into the blood because we're under the impression that we need immediate energy to fight a threat. Okay, so then we're seeing high blood sugar as a result of that. Okay, so all of these factors, you can find interrelatedness amidst them. Now, there are 9 different suggestions that I'm making, but they're all connected. They're all connected. And so, like I said in the beginning, I don't want to diminish anyone's experience. I don't want to say that, well, this is probably less challenging than someone who might be experiencing true anxiety. Now, everyone's experience is valid. Your feelings are valid. And I'm always going to be there to say that, to support that, to emphasize that, okay? Because the last thing we want is to feel invalidated. And I think a lot of us do feel invalidated. However, looking at each of these 9 causes, how might you better approach your day or your life now that you have all of this in mind? Some of them might have resonated. Maybe one resonated stronger than the others. Maybe you resonated with all of them. But I think moral of the story here is we really need to tune into the fact that there are other contributing factors to what we call false anxiety. And I really do believe that we are seeking psychotherapy and medication, and we're not considering these factors prior to doing so. Now, I'm a big supporter of therapy. I think we should all be in therapy. I think we're reaching for medication a little bit prematurely, and these issues are areas that we're not focusing on. Our lifestyle, we're not focusing on as it relates to mental health. And that can be a big mitigator of these symptoms that we're experiencing. So consider all of this. Now, everyone's entitled to what they want to do, right? I'm not going to sit here and say, don't go get medication. I'm also not qualified to talk about medication, so I'm not going to speak on that. But my encouragement to you, given what I know, given my background, and given what I've seen and what I've personally experienced, these are areas that you might be able to look at first and foremost, not only for the sake of anxiety, but just as a general health measure. Because all of these factors are really, ingredients for better quality health if you invest in them. So it's not just anxiety, right? It's not like an isolated cause to just simply symptoms of anxiety. You're going to notice an improvement in how you feel overall just by taking these factors into consideration. Okay. So if anyone has questions for me or feedback on this, please reach out. If you couldn't tell, I'm so passionate about this topic. And I think it's a really important topic that needs to be discussed and needs to be considered in our mental health care. And it's just not. And I think that that's really frustrating. I love working with clients in this capacity. Like I've said before, I'm no longer licensed as a mental health therapist, but I can certainly work with clients on addressing these issues without necessarily doing any kind of therapeutic work, because they're all really rooted in our physical health, right? So if I'm working with you on stabilizing your blood sugar, on promoting good sleep hygiene, on managing your gut issues, on, looking at the hormone piece and setting boundaries in your relationship with technology, looking at deficiencies and so forth, I am also able to address these potential mental health concerns because of the fact that they're so interconnected. Okay? So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know where to find me. If you need support, please feel free to reach out. My email's in the show notes. My website's in the show notes. My, social media information's in the show notes. All of that is available to you. I'd love to talk with you if any of these resonated, or if you do need support, please don't hesitate to reach out or go ahead and schedule a free consult. Totally up to you. But like I said, thank you for being here. It means everything to me. As we move through Mental Health Awareness Month, I hope that these episodes bring you value and help to clarify, help to empower you on your own mental health journey. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much, and be well.